Mark never thought a simple hobby would turn his life upside down. But then again, he never imagined his homeowners association would become his worst nightmare either. This whole mess started in the most peaceful way possible, which made what happened later even more unbelievable. 3 years ago, Mark was house hunting. He'd been renting apartments for almost a decade and finally saved enough for a down payment. He wasn't looking for anything fancy, just a decent place where he could relax after long days at work. That's when his real estate agent showed him a house in Willowbrook, a quiet suburban neighborhood about 20 minutes from the city. The moment Mark pulled into the community, he felt something click. The streets were clean and tree-lined. The houses weren't cookie-cutter identical, but had a nice variety to them. Kids were riding bikes. People were walking dogs. It looked like the kind of place where neighbors actually knew each other's names. But what really caught his eye was the pond right in the center of the community. It wasn't huge, maybe half the size of a football field, but it was beautiful. Surrounded by walking paths and benches with ducks paddling around and cattails growing along the edges. The water sparkled in the afternoon sun. Mark stood there for a moment, just taking it in. His agent noticed his interest and smiled. "That's one of the main features of this community," she told him. "The pond is for all residents to enjoy. People love it here. You'll see joggers in the morning, families feeding the ducks in the evening. It's really the heart of the neighborhood." Mark had been fishing since he was 7 years old. His dad used to take him to lakes every weekend during summer. Even after his dad passed away 5 years ago, Mark kept up the tradition. It was his way of staying connected, of finding peace when life got stressful. Looking at that pond, he could already picture himself there early in the morning with his fishing rod, watching the sunrise, feeling that familiar calm wash over him. He bought the house 2 weeks later. The first few months were everything Mark hoped they'd be. He settled into his new place, hung pictures on the walls, got to know his neighbors. There was Tom and his wife next door who both worked from home. Across the street lived an elderly couple who kept the most amazing garden. A few houses down was a family with 2 young kids who were always playing basketball in their driveway. But the pond became Mark's favorite part of his new life. He'd wake up around 5:30 in the morning, make himself some coffee, grab his fishing gear, and head down there. The early morning was his favorite time. The neighborhood was quiet. The air was cool and fresh. Sometimes mist would hang over the water and everything felt almost magical. Mark practiced catch and release. He wasn't fishing for dinner. He just loved the meditative quality of it, the patience it required, the gentle tug on the line when a fish bit, the brief moment of connection with another living thing before letting it go back into the water. It cleared his mind better than any meditation app ever could. The pond had a good population of largemouth bass and bluegill. Nothing huge, but that didn't matter to Mark. He'd caught a bass that was maybe 3 pounds once, and that was exciting enough. Most days he'd catch 2 or 3 fish in an hour or so, release them carefully, and head home to get ready for work. It became his routine, his ritual, the best part of his day. And here's the thing that made everything that happened later so crazy. Nobody had a problem with it. At least not at first. His neighbors would wave as they walked by on their morning jogs. Some would stop to chat, ask what he'd caught, tell him about the big one they saw jump near the fountain last week. A couple of retired guys even asked him for tips and started fishing there too occasionally. One morning, a woman walking her golden retriever stopped and watched him for a minute. "I love seeing you out here," she said. "It's so peaceful. My husband used to fish. Seeing you reminds me of him." Mark smiled and they chatted for a few minutes about her late husband's favorite fishing spots. Even the kids in the neighborhood were curious. Sometimes a few would bike down to the pond and ask questions. "What kind of fish are in there? Do they bite? How do you know when to reel it in?" Mark always took time to answer, show them his tackle box, let them see a fish up close before he released it. Their parents seemed to appreciate it too. More than once, a dad or mom thanked him for being patient with their kids' endless questions. Mark also made sure to be respectful of the space. He always cleaned up after himself, never left any fishing line or trash behind. He knew how dangerous discarded fishing line could be for birds and other animals. He stayed on designated paths, didn't trample the grass around the pond's edge. When he saw trash others had left, he'd pick that up too. He'd even read through all his HOA documents when he first moved in. The packet was thick and boring, full of rules about lawn maintenance and fence heights and what colors you could paint your house. There was a section about the pond too. It said residents couldn't swim in it for safety reasons. It said not to feed the wildlife because it could attract pests and make animals dependent on humans. It said to keep the area clean and not to throw anything into the water. Standard stuff that made sense. But nowhere, and Mark had read it carefully, did it say anything about fishing being prohibited. In fact, the document specifically called the pond a community amenity for residents to enjoy. That seemed pretty clear to Mark. An amenity meant something you were supposed to use, not just look at. His real estate agent had even mentioned it during the home tour. People fish there sometimes, she'd said casually, like it was the most normal thing in the world. And in Mark's mind it was. A community with a pond, residents fishing in it. That's just what happened. He'd seen it in other neighborhoods before. For 3 full years this was Mark's life. Work during the week, fishing in the mornings when he could, mowing his lawn on weekends, saying hi to neighbors, paying his HOA dues on time every quarter. He wasn't causing problems. He wasn't the guy playing loud music at midnight or parking his car on the lawn or painting his house neon purple. He was just a regular guy living his life and enjoying the amenity his community provided. Life felt good, stable, peaceful. Mark had found his place. He had no idea that everything was about to change. He had no idea that his peaceful morning routine was about to turn into a battle that would involve lawyers, police officers, and a showdown with people who thought they had way more power than they actually did, all because he was doing something that nobody could actually prove was against any rule, but that someone had decided they didn't like. Sometimes the biggest fights start over the smallest things, and sometimes standing up for your right to do something as simple and harmless as fishing in your own communities pond becomes a much bigger deal than anyone ever expected. It was a Tuesday afternoon when everything changed. Mark had just gotten home from work, loosened his tie, and walked out to grab the mail. Bills, mostly. A credit card offer, a flyer for a pizza place, and then a white envelope with the Willowbrook HOA logo in the corner. His first thought was that it was probably the quarterly newsletter, maybe a reminder about the community yard sale or something about pool maintenance. He tossed the other mail on the kitchen counter and opened the HOA letter while standing there. What he read made his stomach drop. Dear resident, it started, formal and cold. It has come to the attention of the Homeowners Association Board that you have been engaging in fishing activities at the community pond. Please be advised that fishing is not an approved activity for use of this amenity. We require that you cease this activity immediately. Failure to comply will result in fines as outlined in our community guidelines. Thank you for your cooperation in maintaining the standards of our community. Mark read it 3 times. Then he read it again. His heart was pounding now, that anxious feeling you get when you're accused of something you didn't do, or in this case, something you didn't even know was wrong. Fishing wasn't approved? Since when? He'd been fishing at that pond for 3 years. 3 years. Not 3 weeks or 3 months. 3 entire years. If it wasn't allowed, why hadn't anyone said anything before? Why had neighbors chatted with him about it? Why had his real estate agent specifically mentioned that people fished there? Mark sat down at his kitchen table and read the letter one more time. The wording bothered him. It didn't say fishing was prohibited or against the rules. It said it wasn't an approved activity. What did that even mean? Did every single thing residents did need to be explicitly approved? Did walking around the pond need approval? Did sitting on the benches need approval? He got up and went to his home office, pulling out the thick folder he'd kept from when he bought the house. Inside was all the HOA documentation. The community bylaws, the architectural guidelines, the covenant rules, everything. He'd read through it when he first moved in, but that was 3 years ago. Time to read it again, more carefully this time. Mark spent the next hour going through every single page. He read the section about the pond multiple times. There it was in black and white. The community pond is designated as an amenity for resident enjoyment and recreation. It listed specific prohibitions clearly. No swimming or wading due to safety concerns and lack of lifeguard services. No feeding of wildlife, including ducks and geese, as it creates dependence and attracts pests. No littering or dumping of any materials into the water. Residents must stay on designated pathways and not damage landscaping around the pond area. Mark read it 3 times. Fishing was not mentioned, not once. Not in the pond section, not in the general rules section, not anywhere in the entire document. He even used the search function on the digital copy he had on his computer. 0 results for the word fishing. How could they tell him to stop doing something that wasn't against any written rule? He looked at the letter again. It was signed by someone named Linda Patterson, HOA board president. Mark had seen her around the neighborhood a few times but never really talked to her. She lived in one of the bigger houses on the north side of the community. Always seemed a bit uptight from what he'd observed. Always had something to say at the annual meetings about property values and community standards. Mark felt anger rising in his chest, but he tried to stay calm. Maybe this was just a misunderstanding. Maybe someone new on the board didn't know the rules. Maybe they'd received incorrect information. He decided he wouldn't respond to the letter right away. He'd think about it. Maybe talk to some neighbors, figure out the best way to handle this. That evening, he walked over to Tom's house next door. Tom had lived in Willowbrook for 7 years, way longer than Mark. If anyone would know about HOA drama, it would be him. Tom answered the door with a beer in his hand. "Hey neighbor, what's up?" Mark showed him the letter. Tom's eyebrows went up as he read it. "Seriously? They're coming after you for fishing?" Tom handed the letter back and shook his head. "Man, this HOA board has been getting worse the past year or so. Ever since Linda took over as president, she's been on this whole power trip about maintaining standards and protecting property values. My wife got a violation notice last month because our mailbox had a tiny bit of rust on it. A tiny bit. She made us replace the whole thing. But fishing isn't even against the rules," Mark said. "I checked my documents. It's not mentioned anywhere," Tom sighed. "With Linda, it doesn't always matter what the actual rules say. If she decides she doesn't like something, she finds a way to make it an issue. Did you know she tried to ban people from parking trucks in their own driveways? Said it looked lower class. Had to back down on that one when someone threatened to lawyer up. This wasn't making Mark feel better. So what should I do?" "Go to the next board meeting," Tom suggested. "It's next Thursday, I think. Check the community website. Show up and ask them to explain where in the bylaws fishing is prohibited.
Put them on the spot.
If enough people see them being unreasonable, maybe they'll back off." Mark thanked him and went home. He spent the rest of the evening looking up HOA laws in his state, reading forums online where other people dealt with overreaching HOAs, trying to understand his rights. The more he read, the angrier he got. This was his home. He paid property taxes. He paid HOA dues every quarter over $300. For what? So someone on a power trip could tell him he couldn't fish in a pond that was supposed to be for residents to enjoy? He barely slept that night. His mind kept running through arguments, through what he'd say at the meeting, through worst-case scenarios. Would they actually fine him? Could they put a lien on his house over this? The internet had horror stories about HOAs foreclosing on people's homes over unpaid fines. Surely it wouldn't come to that over fishing, right? The next morning, Mark almost didn't go to the pond. Part of him wanted to just avoid the whole situation. But then another part of him, the stubborn part, said no way. He hadn't done anything wrong. He wasn't going to let some busybody with a clipboard control what he did on community property that he had every right to use. He went fishing. And as he sat there in the quiet morning watching his line in the water, he felt both peaceful and defiant at the same time. This was his spot, his routine, his 3 years of mornings that never hurt anyone or anything. Nobody was taking that away from him without a real reason. Over the next few days, Mark talked to a few other neighbors. Turned out he wasn't the only one who'd had run-ins with the current board. Mrs. Chen down the street got cited for having the wrong shade of beige on her shutters. The Reynolds family got a warning for their kid's basketball hoop being 6 inches too far into the driveway. Another guy got fined for putting his trash cans out the night before pickup instead of the morning of. "They've gotten ridiculous," one neighbor told him. "Half the board needs to be voted out. But nobody ever runs against them because who wants to deal with that headache?" Mark checked the community website and confirmed the next HOA board meeting was Thursday at 7 in the evening. At the clubhouse, the agenda was posted. It was the usual boring stuff. Budget review, landscaping contract renewal, pool closing schedule, nothing about pond usage or fishing. Good. That meant he'd have to bring it up during the open comment period at the end. He started preparing what he'd say. He'd be calm, respectful, logical. He'd ask for clarification. He'd reference the bylaws. He'd point out that fishing wasn't prohibited anywhere in the governing documents. This would be a simple misunderstanding that could be cleared up with a reasonable conversation. At least, that's what Mark hoped. Thursday evening came. Mark put on a nice shirt, grabbed his folder of HOA documents with key sections highlighted, and walked to the clubhouse. His hands were a little sweaty. Public speaking had never been his thing, and confrontation even less so. But this was important. This was about standing up for himself. The meeting room was small, maybe 20 folding chairs set up facing a long table where the board members sat. Only about 7 or 8 other residents were there, mostly older folks who came to every meeting. Mark recognized a few faces but didn't know their names. Linda Patterson sat in the center of the board table, flanked by 2 other board members. She was exactly how Mark remembered. Mid-60s, short gray hair styled stiffly, thin lips, the kind of expression that looked like she was always smelling something unpleasant. She wore a blazer and had papers organized neatly in front of her. The meeting started. Budget numbers. Talk about hiring a new company to maintain the walking paths. Discussion about whether to allow Halloween decorations before October 1st. Mark tried to pay attention, but his mind was racing, going over what he'd say. Finally, after 45 minutes that felt like hours, Linda announced, "We'll now open the floor for resident comments. Please keep remarks brief and respectful." Mark's heart hammered. He raised his hand. Linda's eyes flickered to him, and for just a second he could swear he saw recognition. She knew who he was. This wasn't going to be as simple as he hoped. "Yes, the gentleman in the blue shirt," she said, her voice flat. Mark stood up, his folder in hand. This was it. Time to fight for his right to fish. Mark cleared his throat and tried to keep his voice steady. Every eye in the room was on him now, and it made his skin prickle with nervousness. But he pushed through it. "Hi, my name is Mark. I live on Maple Drive. I received a letter from the board this week about fishing at the community pond, and I wanted to address it." Linda's expression didn't change. She just nodded slightly like she'd been expecting this. "Go ahead." Mark opened his folder and pulled out the letter. "The letter says that fishing isn't an approved activity, and that I need to stop immediately or face fines. But I've gone through all of my HOA documents, and I can't find anywhere that says fishing is prohibited. I've been fishing at the pond for 3 years without any issues. So I'm hoping someone can help me understand where this rule comes from." He thought he'd been pretty diplomatic about it, not accusatory, just asking for clarification. But Linda's response was immediate and dismissive. "The board has the authority to determine appropriate use of community amenities," she said, her voice clipped and formal. "While fishing may not be explicitly prohibited in the older versions of our bylaws, it falls outside the scope of approved recreational activities for the pond area." Mark felt his frustration rising. "But the documents say the pond is for resident enjoyment and recreation." "Fishing is recreation, and if it's not explicitly prohibited, then how can you tell me I can't do it?" One of the other board members, a balding man in his 50s, leaned forward. "The issue is that we've received complaints from residents who feel that fishing disrupts the peaceful aesthetic of the pond. They've reported seeing you there as early as 5:30 in the morning." 5:30 in the morning when basically nobody else is there," Mark said, trying to keep his tone respectful but feeling it slip a little. "I'm quiet. I clean up after myself. I practice catch and release. I'm not disturbing anyone." "That's your perspective," Linda said coldly, "but we have to consider all residents' concerns. Some people enjoy the pond as a visual amenity and find the presence of fishing equipment and activities to be disruptive to that experience." Mark couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Disruptive? I'm sitting on a bench with a fishing rod. How is that more disruptive than people walking their dogs or kids riding bikes around it?" "The board has made its decision," Linda said, and her tone made it clear she considered the discussion over. "Fishing is not in keeping with the community standards we're trying to maintain. If you continue to fish at the pond, you'll receive a fine of $100 per violation." Mark felt heat rising in his face. "Can I ask who complained? Because in 3 years I've had nothing but positive interactions with neighbors about fishing. People stop and chat with me. Some have even asked for tips." "We don't disclose the identity of residents who file complaints," the third board member said, a woman with glasses who'd been silent until now. "That's our policy to protect people's privacy." "Of course it is," Mark muttered louder than he meant to. Linda's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me?" Mark took a breath. He was losing his cool and he knew it, but this whole thing was so absurd. "Look, I'm not trying to be difficult. I just want to understand how you can enforce a rule that doesn't exist in the governing documents." Don't you have to follow your own bylaws? We follow the bylaws and have the discretionary authority to interpret them in the best interest of the community, Linda said. Her voice had gone from cold to icy. The board acts as stewards of property values and community standards. That sometimes means making decisions about appropriate use of shared spaces. Even when those decisions contradict what the actual written rules say, Mark asked. The tension in the room was thick now. The other residents watching seemed uncomfortable, shifting in their seats. One older woman near the front was nodding along with Linda. A younger couple in the back looked sympathetic to Mark. Linda straightened her papers with a sharp gesture. Mr. She paused, waiting. Johnson, Mark said. Mr. Johnson. The board has been patient in bringing this to your attention. Many boards would have simply started issuing fines immediately. We gave you the courtesy of a warning letter. I suggest you take advantage of that courtesy and comply with our directive. Or what? The words came out before Mark could stop them. You'll fine me for doing something that's not against any written rule? That doesn't seem legal. The balding board member spoke up again, and there was a warning in his tone. The HOA has the right to levy fines for violations of community standards. Those fines can accumulate. They can result in liens against your property if left unpaid. I don't think you want to go down that road over something as trivial as fishing. Trivial. They were calling his peaceful morning routine. His connection to his late father. His favorite part of living in this community. Trivial. Mark felt his hands shaking slightly. It's not trivial to me, he said quietly, and I don't think I should have to give up something I've been doing for 3 years, something that's not actually against any rule. Just because one person complained and you decided to back them up. Linda closed her folder with a decisive snap. Then you'll receive fines. It's your choice, Mr. Johnson. Thank you for your comment. Are there any other resident concerns? Just like that, he was dismissed. Mark stood there for a second, stunned. That was it? No discussion? No consideration, no logic? He looked around the room, hoping someone else would speak up, would point out how ridiculous this was. But everyone avoided his eyes except the young couple in the back. The woman gave him a sympathetic look and a slight shrug. Mark sat down, his mind reeling. The meeting continued with more mundane business, but he didn't hear any of it. He just kept replaying the conversation in his head, getting angrier each time. They had no rule against fishing. They admitted they had no rule against it. But they were going to fine him anyway because someone complained and because Linda apparently had decided fishing didn't fit her vision of community standards. When the meeting ended, Mark walked out quickly. He didn't want to talk to anyone. But as he headed toward the parking lot, someone called his name. It was the young couple from the back of the room. The man was probably in his early 30s, wearing jeans and a hoodie. The woman was about the same age, with her hair pulled back in a ponytail. Hey, we just wanted to say we think that was complete garbage in there, the man said. I'm Kevin, and this is my wife, Beth. We live on Oak Street. Thanks, Mark said. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Am I crazy, or was that completely unreasonable? Oh, it was completely unreasonable, Beth said. Linda's been like this ever since she became president last year. She's got this whole thing about making Willowbrook more upscale. We got cited last month because our kids left a soccer ball in the front yard overnight. A soccer ball. Said it was clutter that diminished curb appeal. Kevin nodded. The problem is that most people are too scared to push back. They just comply because they don't want the hassle. But that's how she gets more powerful. Nobody challenges her, so she thinks she can do whatever she wants. So what do I do? Mark asked. I checked the bylaws. Fishing isn't prohibited. They can't just make up rules, can they? Technically, no, Kevin said. But they'll try. My advice? Document everything. Keep copies of all the bylaws showing fishing isn't mentioned. If they fine you, you might need to fight it legally. We know a guy who had to hire a lawyer last year to fight the board over a fence dispute. He won, but it was a hassle. Mark felt exhausted just thinking about it. A lawyer? Over fishing in a pond? This was insane. Thanks for the support, he said. I'm going to need to think about what to do next. He walked home in the dark, his mind churning. Part of him wanted to just give up, avoid the conflict, find somewhere else to fish. It would be easier, less stressful. Life was too short for this kind of drama. But another part of him, the stubborn part that his dad had always said would either be his greatest strength or his biggest problem, refused to back down. This was wrong. Linda and her board were abusing their power. making up rules that didn't exist, threatening him with fines for doing something he had every right to do. If he backed down, what message did that send? That people with a little bit of authority could bully you into submission even when they were in the wrong? By the time Mark got home, he'd made his decision. He wasn't going to stop fishing. If they wanted to fine him, let them try. He'd document everything, keep copies of all the bylaws, and if it came to it, he'd get a lawyer and fight. This was his home, his community. He paid his dues. He followed the actual rules. And he wasn't going to let Linda Patterson or anyone else tell him he couldn't fish in a pond that belonged to all the residents. The next morning, Mark woke up at 5:30 as usual. He made his coffee, grabbed his fishing gear, and walked to the pond. The sun was just starting to color the sky pink and orange. The water was calm. A few ducks were sleeping near the shore. Mark set up his spot, cast his line, and settled in. If they wanted a fight, he'd give them one. He wasn't backing down. Not over this. Not when he was right. For the next week, Mark kept up his routine. Every morning that he could, he was at the pond by dawn with his fishing rod. Part of it was principle. Part of it was just that he genuinely loved being there. The peace of the early morning, the sound of the water, the simple pleasure of casting his line. He wasn't going to let anyone take that away from him. He half expected to find another letter in his mailbox every day. But nothing came. Maybe Linda had backed off. Maybe she'd realized she was overreaching. Or maybe she was just busy with other things. Mark allowed himself to hope that the whole situation would just fade away. He should have known better. It was a Saturday morning, about a week and a half after the board meeting. Mark had been at the pond since around 6. The weather was perfect. Cool but not cold, with a light breeze rippling across the water. He'd already caught and released 2 decent-sized bass. He was completely in his zone, relaxed, thinking about nothing except the feel of the line in his hands. Then he heard the footsteps behind him. 2 sets of footsteps, heavy and purposeful. "Excuse me, sir." Mark's heart jumped. He knew that tone. He turned around and saw exactly what he'd feared. 2 police officers, both in uniform, walking toward him across the grass. One was older, maybe in his 50s with gray at his temples. The other looked younger, probably late 20s. Both had serious expressions. Mark's mouth went dry. He'd never been in trouble with the law in his life. Never even gotten a speeding ticket. And now there were 2 cops approaching him while he was fishing in his own neighborhood pond. "Morning, officers," Mark said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Is there a problem?" The older officer spoke. "We received a call about suspicious activity at this location. Someone reported a person trespassing on community property. Would you mind telling us what you're doing here?" Mark felt anger flash through his shock. Suspicious activity, trespassing. They'd called the police on him. Linda and her board had actually called the cops because he was fishing. "I live here," Mark said, gesturing vaguely toward his street. "On Maple Drive, just a few streets over. I'm fishing. I've been fishing here for 3 years. The younger officer looked at the pond, then back at Mark. "And do you have permission to be fishing here?" "It's a community pond," Mark explained, trying to stay calm even though his hands were shaking slightly. "I'm a resident. I pay HOA dues. The pond is listed as a community amenity for residents to enjoy. I have every right to be here." The older officer pulled out a small notebook. "What's your name and address, sir?" Mark gave them his information. The officer wrote it down, then looked at his partner. "Can you run that?" The younger officer walked a few feet away and spoke into his radio, running Mark's information through their system. Mark stood there feeling like a criminal. A couple of early morning joggers passed by on the path, looking over with curiosity. Perfect. Now his neighbors were seeing him being questioned by police. "Sir, the call we received claimed you were trespassing," the older officer said. The caller identified themselves as being from the Homeowners Association. "They said you've been asked to leave and have refused." "That's not true," Mark said, and he could hear the frustration in his own voice. "I've never been asked to leave. I got a letter saying fishing wasn't an approved activity, but I checked all my HOA documents and there's no rule against fishing. The pond is a shared amenity. I'm not trespassing on my own community property." The younger officer came back over. "He's clean. Address checks out. He does live on Maple Drive. Do you have those HOA documents with you?" the older officer asked Mark. "Not with me right now, but I have them at my house. I can go get them. It's literally a 5-minute walk." Mark was already reeling in his line, ready to go prove his case. "That's okay, sir. Just stay here for a moment." The older officer looked thoughtful. He turned to his partner. "Did dispatch give you a callback number for the HOA?" The younger officer checked his notes and nodded. He made a phone call, stepping away again. Mark watched, his heart still pounding. This was insane. He was being investigated like a criminal for fishing in his own neighborhood. After a few minutes, the younger officer came back. "I spoke with the HOA board president. She confirmed they've asked the resident to stop fishing and that he's refused to comply. She says it's a violation of community standards." "But is it trespassing?" the older officer asked. "Is he banned from the property? Is there a restraining order or formal trespass warning?" "No, sir. Nothing like that. She just said they've told him not to fish there." The older officer looked at Mark. "Do you have your phone with you?" "Yes," Mark said, pulling it out. "Can you pull up your HOA documents? I'd like to see the section about the pond." Mark's hands fumbled with his phone. It took him a minute because his fingers were shaking from adrenaline, but he finally found the digital copy of his HOA bylaws. He pulled up the relevant section and showed it to the officer. The officer read it carefully, scrolling through. He read it twice. Then he looked at Mark. "This says the pond is a community amenity for resident enjoyment and recreation. It lists specific prohibitions. No swimming, no feeding wildlife, no littering. I don't see anything about fishing." "Exactly," Mark said. "That's what I've been trying to tell them. There's no rule against it." The older officer handed the phone back. "Mr. Johnson, from what I can see here, you're not violating any laws. This is a civil matter between you and your HOA. We can't arrest someone or remove them from community property they have a legal right to access just because the HOA says so, especially when their own documents don't back up their claim." Relief flooded through Mark so fast he almost felt dizzy. "So I can stay?" "As far as we're concerned, yes. You're a resident. You're on community property. You're not breaking any laws or causing a disturbance. This is an HOA dispute, not a criminal matter." The officer paused. "Though I will say, if your HOA is giving you trouble, you might want to consult with an attorney about your rights. These kinds of disputes can get messy." "Thank you," Mark said. "Really, thank you. I was terrified when I saw you coming." The younger officer actually smiled a little at that. "I don't blame you. Having cops show up is never fun, even when you haven't done anything wrong." The older officer gave Mark his card. "If they call us out here again for the same thing, mention this interaction. We've documented it. We're not going to keep responding to calls about legal activity. The HOA needs to resolve this through proper channels, not by wasting police resources." The officers left, and Mark sat back down on his bench. His legs felt weak. His hands were still shaking. They'd called the police on him. Linda and her board had actually called the police and reported him for trespassing, trying to get him arrested or at least removed from the pond. The anger that hit him then was unlike anything he'd felt in years. This wasn't just about fishing anymore. This was harassment. This was abuse of power on a level that was actually scary. What if the officers hadn't been reasonable? What if they'd just taken the HOA's word and arrested him? What if he'd had to spend a night in jail over fishing? Mark tried to go back to fishing, but his hands were shaking too much. His peaceful morning was completely ruined. He packed up his gear and walked home, his mind spinning. When he got back to his house, he sat at his kitchen table and just breathed for a few minutes. Then he made a decision. He pulled out his laptop and started searching for real estate attorneys who handled HOA disputes. The first 3 he called didn't answer on a Saturday, but the 4th one did. Her name was Rachel, and she specialized in exactly this kind of thing. Mark explained the whole situation. The letter, the board meeting, the police being called. She listened without interrupting. "Do you have copies of your HOA documents?" she asked when he finished. "Yes, everything." "And fishing isn't mentioned anywhere as prohibited?" "Nowhere. I've read them cover to cover 3 times now." Rachel was quiet for a moment. "Mr. Johnson, what they're doing is harassment. They can't enforce rules that don't exist. They can't call the police on you for legal activity. And they definitely can't threaten you with fines for something that's not in your governing documents. I'd be happy to take your case. My initial consult is free, and if we move forward, I charge by the hour. But for something like this, we're probably talking about one strongly worded letter that'll make them back off." "How much?" Mark asked. "The letter would probably run you about $300 to $400, but it would come from an attorney. It would cite the specific laws they're violating, and it would threaten legal action if they continue. In my experience, that's usually enough. Most HOA boards are volunteers who don't want actual legal trouble. Mark didn't even hesitate. Do it! Write the letter. I'll need you to send me copies of everything. The HOA documents, the letter they sent you, any emails or correspondence, and a written statement about the police being called. Can you get me all that by Monday? I'll have it to you by tonight, Mark said. After he hung up, Mark felt better than he had in weeks. He wasn't backing down, but now he wasn't fighting alone. He had someone in his corner who knew the law, who could speak the language these people understood. Mark spent the rest of the day gathering everything, writing out a detailed timeline of events and emailing it all to Rachel. Then he did something else. He made a post on the community Facebook group explaining what had happened. Not angry or accusatory, just factual. The HOA called the police on him for fishing, even though it's not against any rules. The response was immediate. Dozens of comments from neighbors expressing shock, offering support, sharing their own stories of HOA overreach. By evening, over 100 people had commented. Several said they'd be attending the next board meeting to speak up. Others said it was time for new leadership. For the first time since this all started, Mark felt like maybe things were going to be okay. Rachel worked fast. By Tuesday afternoon, she'd drafted a letter and sent it to Mark for approval. Reading it gave him chills in the best way. It was professional and formal, but the message was crystal clear. Back off or face serious legal consequences. The letter cited specific state laws about HOA governance, pointed out that fishing was nowhere prohibited in the Willowbrook governing documents, noted that calling police for legal activity could constitute harassment, and explained that threatening fines for non-existent violations was potentially actionable. It demanded that the HOA immediately cease all threats related to Mark's fishing activities, and warned that continued interference would result in a lawsuit. Send it, Mark told her without hesitation. Rachel sent the letter via certified mail and email on Wednesday morning. Mark knew Linda would receive it by Thursday at the latest. He tried not to think about it too much. He'd done what he could. Now it was in the hands of professionals in the legal system. Thursday evening was the next scheduled HOA board meeting. Mark hadn't planned to go. He figured his lawyer's letter said everything that needed to be said. But then Kevin texted him around noon. Dude, you need to be at this meeting tonight. Check the community Facebook group right now. Mark opened the app on his phone. The post he'd made about the police being called had completely exploded. Over 200 comments. And people had organized themselves. Someone had created an event for the board meeting with the description, "Time to demand accountability from our HOA board." 50 people had marked themselves as attending. Mark drove to the clubhouse that evening with butterflies in his stomach. The parking lot was absolutely packed. He had to park on the street 2 blocks away. When he walked into the meeting room, he stopped in his tracks. Every single chair was filled. People were standing along the walls, cramped shoulder to shoulder. Mark recognized some faces from around the neighborhood, but there were dozens of people he'd never seen before. The tiny meeting room that usually held maybe 10 people now had at least 60 crammed inside. It was standing room only, hot and crowded. Linda and the 2 other board members sat at their table looking completely overwhelmed. Linda's usual composed expression had visible cracks in it. She looked genuinely stressed, maybe even scared. The balding board member was whispering urgently to her. The woman with glasses kept glancing nervously at the crowd. The meeting started 15 minutes late because they had to scramble to bring in more chairs from the storage room. When Linda finally called things to order, her voice wasn't as confident as Mark had heard it before. "We have an unusually large turnout tonight. We'll try to accommodate everyone during the comment period, but please keep remarks brief." They rushed through the regular business as fast as possible. Budget reports, maintenance updates, all the boring agenda items. Nobody was really paying attention. Everyone was waiting for the comment section. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Finally, Linda cleared her throat. "We'll now open the floor for resident comments." At least 20 hands shot up immediately. Linda pointed to an older man in the front row, probably hoping to start with someone safe. "I've lived in Willowbrook for 12 years, the man said, his voice strong and clear, "and I've never been more embarrassed by our HOA board than I am right now. Calling the police on a resident for fishing? In a pond that belongs to all of us? That's not leadership. That's abuse of power." I move that we hold a special election to recall this entire board. The room erupted. People were clapping, shouting agreement. Linda tried to restore order, but her voice got lost in the noise. That's not how our procedures work, she said, almost pleading. You can't just call for a special election. Actually, you can, said a woman Mark didn't recognize. She stood up holding a thick binder. According to Article 7, Section 3 of our bylaws, 20% of residents can petition for a recall vote. I've been collecting signatures since Monday. I already have 38% of households. Linda looked absolutely stunned. The balding board member put his head in his hands. Then the floodgates opened. One by one, people stood and shared their stories. The woman who got fined because her trash cans blew over in a storm. The family whose kids got written up for leaving a bike on the lawn. The wrong shade of beige paint. The garden gnome violation. The mailbox rust. On and on it went. Every story showed the same pattern. Linda and her board finding petty reasons to fine people, enforce rules that didn't exist, or interpret bylaws in the most restrictive ways possible. Mark sat quietly through all of it, just listening. He'd thought he was the only one being targeted, but he was wrong. Linda had created an atmosphere where people were genuinely afraid to live normal lives in their own homes. Afraid to decorate, afraid to let their kids play, afraid of their own HOA. Finally, Kevin stood up and gestured toward Mark. My neighbor here just wanted to fish, something he'd been doing peacefully for 3 years, something that isn't against any rule in our bylaws, and instead of having a conversation, the board weaponized the police against him. That's completely unacceptable. More applause, louder this time. Mark felt his throat get tight. He hadn't expected this kind of support. Linda tried one more time to defend herself. The board has been operating within our authority. We've been trying to maintain property values and community standards. By harassing people? Someone shouted from the back. By making up rules? Another voice called out. Linda looked defeated. She glanced at the other board members. Neither would meet her eyes. Finally, she spoke, and her voice was barely above a whisper. Perhaps we've been overly strict in some of our enforcement. If residents feel we've overstepped our authority, then maybe it's time for new leadership. She paused, and Mark could see her hand shaking slightly. I'm resigning from the board effective immediately. For a moment, nobody moved. Then someone started clapping. Then another person. Within seconds, the whole room was applauding. The balding man spoke up quickly. I'll resign as well. The woman with glasses nodded and did the same. Just like that, the entire board resigned. The meeting dissolved into energetic chaos, with people talking about organizing new elections and forming committees to review all the questionable fines from the past year. Mark slipped out quietly while everyone was still talking. He'd gotten what he came for. The next few weeks moved fast. Emergency elections were held. A new board was voted in, including Kevin and Beth. Their first official action was reviewing every enforcement decision from the previous year. They reversed dozens of fines, especially ones based on rules that didn't actually exist in the bylaws, and they officially added fishing to the approved activities list for the pond. They even installed a small sign, "Residents welcome to fish. Please practice catch and release and keep our pond clean." Mark received a formal letter from the new board, short and sincere. We apologize for the treatment you received. Your rights as a resident should never have been questioned. Thank you for standing up for yourself and all of us. 3 months later, Mark was back at his usual spot on a Saturday morning. The sun was rising, painting everything golden. His line was in the water. A light breeze rippled across the pond. Everything was peaceful again, but better than before. He wasn't alone anymore either. Several other residents had started fishing too, inspired by everything that happened. Sometimes they'd fish together, sometimes alone, but there was a real community at the pond now. Catching anything? Tom called out, walking over with his own rod. Not yet. Slow morning. They fished in comfortable silence for a while. Then Tom said, "You know, you could have just stopped fishing. Would have been way easier." Mark thought about that. Yeah, probably. But then Linda would have just moved on to bullying someone else. Sometimes you have to stand up to people like that, even when it's hard. Tom nodded. My wife said she's not scared anymore. Used to stress about every holiday decoration. That's no way to live, Mark agreed completely. HOAs were supposed to protect communities, not terrorize them. When people forgot that and started acting like dictators, someone had to push back. It hadn't been easy. It had been stressful and expensive and scary. But sitting there that morning with his fishing line in the water and neighbors around him, Mark knew it had been absolutely worth it. "Hey, I got one," Tom suddenly shouted, his rod bending. Mark watched his neighbor reel in a nice bass, both of them grinning. They took a quick picture before releasing it back into the water. Just two neighbors fishing at their community pond. Exactly as it should be. Mark cast his line again and settled back. Life was good. Life was peaceful. And most importantly, life was his to live without someone trying to control every little thing he did. Sometimes the smallest battles lead to the biggest changes, and sometimes standing up for something as simple as fishing in a pond means standing up for everyone's right to actually enjoy the place they call home.